Hello, everyone, and welcome to What's Wrong with the Podcast. We hope you're all safe and well, and hope today's discussion will be a slight distraction and you will get informed and inspired. Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Sarah Harper. Sarah is a professor of gerontology at the University of Oxford. She is the co-director of the Oxford Institute of Population Aging, which she founded in 1997, with funding from the National Institute of Aging. Sarah served on the Prime Minister's Council for Science and Technology, which advises the Prime Minister on the scientific evidence for strategic policies and frameworks. In 2017, she served as the director of the Royal Institution of Great Britain. Sarah is a Director and Trustee of the UK Research Integrity Office and a member of the Board of Health Data Research UK. Sarah was appointed a CBE in 2018 for services to demography. Her background in anthropology and population studies and her early research focused on migration and the social implications of demographic change. Her current research on demographic change addresses the impact of falling fertility and increasing life expectancy, with a particular interest in Asia and Africa. Recent research has focused on women's education and empowerment in sub-Saharan Africa and the impact of this on desired family size, older women's health in Africa, and European life course trajectories and late life female health. She currently directs 2 research projects looking at the aging of farmers in Vietnam and Myanmar. She has completed a monograph, How Population Change Will Transform Our World, Oxford University Press. Sarah, welcome.
Hello.
Well, we're very happy to have you here today. Can you please tell us about yourself?
Okay, so I'm Sarah Harper and I'm the Professor of Gerontology at the University of Oxford. 20 years ago, I set up a research institute on aging. And that was because I'd actually been working in the States. I was working at the University of Chicago and I discovered a lot of really interesting things that were happening in America. And I did a lot of work with the National Institute on Aging. And what I was really interested in was this idea that aging wasn't just about older adults, it was about all of us. It was about this transition from younger to older populations. And so I decided that that's what I wanted to focus on. And that's what I work on. And that's what my colleagues at Oxford at the Institute of Population Aging work on.
Amazing. So please enlighten us about the subject then. So let's think of future populations. What are some of the demographic trends that you're seeing that might cause challenges today or in the future?
So I think the way to look at it is when we think of aging, we tend to think of older people and we tend to think of living longer. But the real driver of population aging is actually falling fertility or falling childbearing. So what happens is that across the globe, women start having fewer children. And that means there are less younger people coming into your societies, less younger people coming into the workforces and economies. And because that also combines with us living longer, we push the average age of the age structure up. So in some countries like Italy, for example, Italy is a very old population because it has a very low childbearing rate. People tend to live long, reasonably healthy lives in Italy. Within about 15 years, half of Italy will be aged over 50. Wow. We've never had a country in the world where half its population is aged between 50 and 100. We're used to that sort of pyramid where there's lots of young people at the bottom. But we're going to see that flowing across basically most of Europe. So by the middle of this century, we will have the majority of countries will have over half their population roughly aged over 50. We're seeing it also in Asia, in Southeast Asia, Japan, Korea, they're also aging. And so it's really saying, how do we adjust to that kind of a society, making sure we keep equality both within generations, so across the socioeconomic divide, but also between generations, so that younger generations don't lose out as you have more and more older people.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that change sort of happened almost pretty quickly, right? Because I think you also talk about this often where like in 1960s, there was like other ideas of our future populations, right? Like we were actually scared that global population would be like maybe quadruple what it was then, or like even more.
Yeah, I mean, so you're right, because we're not just talking about an aging population, we're also talking about a declining population. So the interesting thing about aging populations is that we're not just talking about populations that are getting older, we're also talking about declining populations. Now, at the moment, maximum world population is still increasing, but in some parts of the world, we have our populations actually potentially shrinking, and the only reason they're not shrinking is because of immigration. So we have to take the three drivers into account, and that's what is the childbearing rate, what is the death rate, and how is that compensated for by the immigration or the out-migration rate. So in the 1960s, we just thought that birth rates were out of control, that particularly in Asian countries where they were having very, very high families and large numbers of children still, that we were just going to have this massive population explosion. And basically what happened is that what we had seen happen historically in Europe started to flood across the world. So in fact, now in 2/3 of the world's countries, women are at, near, or below replacement level. So increasingly across the world, women, if you can empower them, if you ask how many children would you like, most women want 2 children. And that is more or less replacement.
By replacement, you mean we're standing steady, like when nothing is moving?
Yeah. So if you think about it, you know, that in order that most children, or all children, have a mother and a father. And so if that mother and father have 2 children, they replace themselves. And that's really basically what replacement rate is. Now, it's obviously much more complicated than that because some people do have more than 2 children, and an increasing number of women don't have children.
True.
But it sort of balances out, and it depends on the age structure of the population. But roughly, you can say between 2.1 and 2.4 children per couple tend to be replacement level. But of course, what is happening is that it's happening in different parts of the world at different times. So we have in Southern Europe and in Southeast Asia, we are having families where they're having huge numbers of women who are childless, or they're having 1 child. And as a consequence, those countries are aging very, very rapidly. And the only reason they stay young is because they have immigrants coming into their population. And if you look at the two very successful countries in terms of reducing aging are the UK and France. And we both have very, very high immigrant populations. And it is the immigrants both from Europe and from our former colonies, or what is now our Commonwealth in the case of the UK, that come into our society and invigorate it and keep it young, because the UK has not replaced itself by births since 1976.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah.
That's a while. Wow.
But then you look at many of the Southeast Asian countries, Japan, Korea, obviously China, and they also are aging very, very dramatically. And unless those countries compensate through immigration, then they will very dramatically age. But this is what's happening over the 21st century. And by the end of the 21st century, what we believe will happen is that most countries will be more or less at replacement.
What are the challenges do you think that will come with that in the future? What are some of the things that are being discussed today that with a larger population that is over 50? I mean, it's also tricky because like now we're talking about a healthier population over 50, right? Like it's not necessarily the same implications maybe compared to several years ago. But also there's still like a lot of generational gap in between, which is, I think we read this for like United States in 2030, it is expected that for the first time ever, 3 generations will be over 50 at the same time. So like, it's really interesting to see like how these like different generations are going to be considered the elderly population or like aging population. And yet, like, do we have an understanding of what that might entail? Like, even though, like, because it's going to be a different time, and what aging means could be also really different 20, 30 years from now.
I mean, I think you are exactly right to say that we don't know what aging will be. And the other really important point is around health. So at the moment, we're pushing back the onset of disability, particularly in the high-income countries. And that means that not only are we living longer, but more and more of our population are living longer, healthier. And that's a really good thing. And so you could argue that if we increase healthy life expectancy at the same rate that we're increasing life expectancy, then that doesn't matter. So we have 80-year-olds who are like today's 50-year-olds, maybe. And in which case we live long lives and we continue being productive. and active and contributory. And then the question is, how do we change our lifestyles? Because it's unthinkable that we will stop education in our 20s and retire in our 50s and live healthy lives to 100. So we have to change those life courses. And maybe we're talking about we mix education across the life course. We're in and out of periods of training. We mix economic employment. So maybe when we have children in our 30s and 40s, we step back and we give a lot of time being very positive parents. And then we come back into the workforce in our 40s, 50s, and then we can work till we're 70 because we've had 15 years off in the middle. There are all sorts of different models. So one way of looking at it is so long as we keep healthy, then population aging at some level doesn't matter, except for one thing, and that is the generational question. That if you still have people who are fit and active and running the government and running big corporations and in charge of our societies in their 70s and 80s, it means people in their 30s, 40s and 50s have got to wait longer and longer and longer. You in the States, when you look at, if you look at Biden, Trump and Bernie Sanders, they're all old men, and yet they are accepted as potential or actual political leaders. So in a way, that's what's happened. And we see it in many parts of the world. Here in the UK, we have the classic Prince Charles, who is now in his early 70s, and the Queen at 94 is fabulous and is really active. And, I don't think anyone is thinking the Queen is going to step down, and yet she's 94. So that is a classic generational problem. So it really means that we've got to stop focusing on old people as if they are the issue. It isn't. It's the whole way in which our population structure is changing. And that is a really, really good thing. Because actually what we're saying is that everyone who is born has the chance to live 100 years.
Yeah.
And I think the other way to look at it is if we look, when was the world's first supercentenarian? He was born in 1789. And he died at 110 in 1899. He nearly lived in 3 centuries. So we've all had long-lived people, but at that time there were probably 10 people who lived to 100 in the whole of Europe. So living longer, of course, it's always happened, but very, very few people. Now we have mass aging. That's the thing. We have the wonderful opportunity of us all eventually being able to live these long lives. But as that happens, and it will happen across this century, I think. We're talking at the moment of half the baby girls in high-income countries making it to a century.
Wow.
So, half our population, particularly the girls, because women tend to live longer than men, in high-income countries that are being born at the moment, will probably make it to a century.
That is great news, and I guess get great news for our children and grandchildren too, because we attended a conference by AARP in DC, I think several years ago, and what they were talking about, maybe if it was 2018, I think the data that they were presenting is today's 10-year-old is expected to live until 104. I think based on their studies. So that is very happy news for everyone's children when you think about it. But it raises these crazy interesting questions that you just talked about. It's inconceivable to think you graduate at 21, and if you don't have a after undergraduate, if you're not doing any higher education or masters or PhDs, it stops. And so how does that make sense to life expectancy? And even more questions around the healthcare system, do we only rely on hospitals and people going to hospitals, or should it be a much more adaptive model if the population is completely shifting? And even though the statistics around disability may drop, we might still need more doctor visits, no?
So I think, so interesting. So the AARP study you're referring to was a 2009 study using data from the Human Mortality Database, and they predicted that babies born in 2007 in the States would make it.
Okay, yeah. So today's 10-year-old. Yeah.
And Japan, that's it. That was the study. But it's not the only one. There have been lots and lots of other studies. So from a healthcare point of view, I suppose one of the big things, and remember, it isn't just high-income countries. We're also seeing it in the lower and middle-income countries. So in Asia and Africa, it's slow, but we are seeing life expectancies increase, and we're slowly seeing, particularly in Africa, fertility coming down. Asian fertility is very low. Latin American fertility is low. So we, apart from the coronavirus at the moment, which is obviously very strange, we for half a century have not had to worry in high-income countries about infectious diseases, really. Very few people have died of infectious diseases. The kind of people dying from the coronavirus, which is a viral pneumonia typically, is what we saw until we had antibiotics in the 20th century. Many, particularly older men, died of pneumonia. And so, to a certain extent, that's what we've gone back to. We've gone back to what our grandparents and great-grandparents experienced, but that's very unusual. And the idea of us needing huge numbers of acute medical beds in hospitals in high-income countries really was something we thought we'd left behind. And hopefully when all this is over, we will have left it behind. That means we do have to rethink our healthcare system. Yeah. We have to move away from acute care to chronic comorbidities, looking after people in the community. And I think what we're really understanding is it's all about health across the life course. So one way to look at it is that we very much had a model of geriatric medicine, which is that we all potter along until we get into our 60s or 70s. Then we start getting chronic complaints and we spend the next 20 years trying to battle ill health. Instead of actually putting prevention in when we are younger so that we don't go into chronic ill health probably till our 80s. And we've had great success among the richer populations in high-income countries, really pushing back the onset of some of these chronic diseases. But we still see in some of the poor individuals, even though they're living in high-income countries like North America, Europe, they're starting some of these chronic comorbidities much, much younger. So the key is healthy lives across the life course.
I guess even now with the coronavirus, it's making us rethink our lifestyles, right? Like we're based in New York City. It is very interesting to see the city on pause. We don't stop here. So, and it's not healthy. And we probably do not realize it at a younger age. But like, as you get older, there's a reason why you see less and less elderly people in New York City, because it's not a healthy environment to be in if it's like constantly on the go. So it actually like started to make us like rethink everything about lifestyle. And if we're considering, if we're going to live that long, how can we ensure we have a healthy life living it, not like, the last 30, 40 years with dealing with chronic illnesses. And I think like this also situation sort of started to make us think about, relating to elderlies. I mean, we've unfortunately seen that ageism is a thing, like people taking the lockdown really not seriously, or like this social distancing or staying at home by thinking that that's the 65 plus year olds problem, and it's really sad to see that. And that happened in many, many countries. And when it really got serious, when they started to hear that the hospitals are overflowing or hear about the death rates, people really took it seriously. So we think, and I would love to get your perspective on this, as we sort of are becoming in the more similar age group altogether, and as we have a growing elderly population, that will, I hope, sort of help us really connect and be more in tune with different generations, and maybe we will relate to one another more. So I actually think it might allow for more collaborative and cohesive population.
I mean, I think you're absolutely spot on. I think it's really important to understand that we have lived a very, very age-segregated life over the last 50 to 75 years. That we tend not to live with people of different age groups. We don't work with people of different age groups because of things like early retirement. We exclude very healthy, active adults from about 55 onwards out of our workplaces. And I think because of that, there's all these barriers have sort of built up. And part of it is because our families are smaller. So once upon a time, you would have far more children, far more cousins, far more uncles and aunts, far more grandparents that you would be in contact with, grandchildren, etc. And we just have much smaller nuclear units now. And one of the things, I mean, I think there are many things, I hope, good things could come out of this. One is obviously around health. So, for example, the way that our environment is so much cleaner, and you must see it in New York, it is amazing. I don't know if you saw, there's amazing pictures of Delhi. Did you see the pictures of Delhi? And we know, for example, that air pollution contributes to respiratory problems, and there are some suggestions that actually across the globe, deaths from acute respiratory syndromes will actually go down and compensate from the increase in deaths from coronavirus, because we know that pollution has been particularly bad for people who suffer from these kind of respiratory complaints. We also know that the longer we live with pollutants, the more they build up in our bodies. And there is a body of work that says, yes, we're living with environmental pollutants, we're living with air pollutants, and that may be contributing to ill health across the life course and accumulation as we get older. So hopefully that's one thing we're going to take very seriously, understanding environmental change, pollution, health policy, etc. But the other thing is, I really hope is around age segregation. And one of the things we're doing at Oxford is really pushing for these age-integrated communities. No longer do we want young people living in one area and working in one area and older adults living somewhere else. We should be building proper age-integrated communities. We know, for example, that we have huge problems of loneliness and mental health and lack of well-being among some of our younger people. And even when we look at things like our Oxford students, although we try and look after their well-being, we know that there is an increase in mental health problems among all students at the moment. And we also know that actually living with other young people who've also got these mental health problems can actually increase the constant sort of fear and anxiety. And that if we lived in mixed age groups, there's a lot of evidence where we've done research, particularly where younger people have gone to talk to older people in order to enhance the well-being of older people. And what's happened is the young people have come away and gone, that was just amazing. I feel so much better talking to an older adult who's actually had the same experiences that I had, and being able to understand, that actually life is a series of cycles and you're not doing it by yourself. Your generation is not unique. All generations go through this. They all fall in love, they all split up, they all have issues and problems. So there is a lot of research that shows that putting older adults and younger adults together in a natural way, and that can be within a family, and I'm sure we've all got grandparents and we all really value those kind of conversations we have with our parents and grandparents. And that's what our world should be like. We should be integrating, both in the workplace and in our communities, older and younger and middle-aged people. And why did we all start segregating? That I think it was for the wrong reasons, and I think we've suffered from it. And we have a lot of evidence also that mixed age groups are very, very good from an employment point of view. And we now have a real body of research that if you have mixed age teams, they're far more productive than just having single age teams.
Right. Wow. So interesting. What do you think as like some of these, and I guess like we talk about intergenerational communities, it also goes into housing. And then when we talked about the educational system, we talked about healthcare, well, unfortunately, it's like relies on government and policy, which typically takes a while and lags, right? What do you think, I guess, private corporations or different professions like architects or, individual like private health companies or even like schools can do to sort of be a little bit more proactive about this? Like, do we need to raise more awareness? Is it education? Do we just need to create case examples and get the word out there? What do you think?
I would say that definitely 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, governments had woken up to the fact that we needed not just to look at healthcare and pensions, but we needed to look at education, we needed to look at work, we needed to look at the built environment. I chaired a big review for the UK government 3-4 years ago, and our overwhelming findings was that the built environment is so important. Housing is important, workplaces are important, public spaces are important, transport systems are important, and if we need to get our physical infrastructure right. But I would say over the last 2 or 3 years, I do a lot of corporate talking, and it used corporate speaking, and it used to be very much insurance companies and banks, but now it's the real estate world.
Wow, that's just great to hear.
Just before the world closed down, I went to a big real estate conference in London, and for the first time, instead of me talking and people going, oh gosh, that's interesting, we had people from different corporate entities, somebody who dealt with retail, someone who dealt with offices, and someone who dealt with residential communities. And we had a panel after my talk, and they all were really well informed, and they'd all done their own research. And this was the corporate world going, we need to take this seriously, this age shift. And they were really buying into the fact that a lot of it's about health, a lot of it is about understanding that age groups are not homogeneous, that we need age-integrated communities. So I just got this real feeling that suddenly the corporate world is really beginning to understand that demographic aging is a real challenge, but it can also be an opportunity, and in the end, we'll have a better world.
That is, yeah, I think that is the mind-blowing part, like how they missed out on that. Like, if, you know, like if you're not even trying to be socially responsible or just like, you know, considerate of our elderly population, it is a huge market if you consider that now 50 above population is actually going to be the population that has the money to even be part of something. We also look into like home ownerships and how it's drastically lower in 25 to 40 age groups compared to how it was years ago. And when we consider that, and also all these tech innovations and how so many 25 or 30-year-olds today are actually exiting with millions of dollars or pounds, and they're the ones who are going to be wealthy over 50. So it's interesting to see like they caught up to that late, because that's your future client. If you're not considering about any social aspect, at least that is, you know, as a business, I think, you know, they're late, but I'm at least glad to hear like real estate individuals are also attending these conferences, as real estate typically also lags, right? We're not where we should be at housing, public spaces, and you know, it's very, very behind on sustainability, and it has huge implications on climate change too. So at least it's good to hear, you know, there's pickup on that.
But the other thing to look, I mean, we did a piece of work maybe 10 years ago, and we brought the sustainable development people with the inclusive people together. So those people who are concerned about the environment and those people who are concerned about age integration.
Yeah.
And the best way to solve both those problems was to solve them together. That the kind of drivers around us all beginning to live in a more communal way, a more sustainable way. What was good for the environment was also good for bringing people together, living in smaller communities but integrated communities. Instead of having very expensive, huge acute hospitals, having local community centres. So when we started coming from each of our own perspectives, we realised that sustainable, inclusive communities is the future.
Yeah, I think that ties perfectly into us asking your advice. We actually do need multidisciplinary teams or diverse teams to address not only just like disciplines, but different interests or different beliefs to come together and sort of plan for our future. Anything else you would want to add to that?
I think multidisciplinary approaches are crucial. I think it's understanding that the built environment in all its aspects is going to provide a sustainable future going forward, and that this age integration, if anything, we shouldn't be talking about older adults, we should be talking about a sort of age integrated society. And we should be getting away from the idea that somehow at 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 you become old, whereas at 20, 35, even 40 you're young. I mean, you know, we live in a complex society, and we should be looking at individuals and individual needs and enabling us basically across our life course to live healthy, active lives for as long as it's possible.
This was amazing. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching this week's episode. If you found value in these conversations, please like our video and hit the subscribe button. Make sure to visit our website, podcast.what'swrongwith.xyz, and subscribe to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts so you never miss an episode. Please leave us a comment or review, or you can simply tell your friends about us. For more details on our guests, follow us on Instagram and Twitter. You can find our handles in the description below. And don't forget to join us next week.